Now friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. If you've been following the newest and last season of the Clone Wars, you've probably noticed some real upgrades in lighting and depth of field, amongst many other things like the heavy weight of the decisions being made by characters as they head to their starting positions for Episode 3. If you haven't watched up until Episode 9 of the new season of Clone Wars, there will be some spoilers in this video. Now, the season started off with a bang with Clone Force 99 and kind of struggled mid-season as Ahsoka tried to find her way in the Undercity after leaving the Jedi Temple. And now, as we close towards the finale, things begin to heat up again, and it's all thanks to a Mandalorian named Bo-Katan Kryze. She's a reformed Death Watch member and now in charge of a small splinter faction known as the Nite Owls, which is also made up of reformed Death Watch members. The Death Watch had taken over Mandalore from her pacifist sister Satine Kryze. Maul stepped out of the shadows just long enough to kill the head of the Death Watch, Pre Vizsla, in a duel and took his throne. While most of the members of Death Watch pledged loyalty to Maul, Bo-Katan and her close followers refused to. It wasn't because she was against the Sith or thought Maul was evil or something like that. It was just that she was a traditionalist and she didn't believe that outsiders should rule Mandalore. And from that moment on, she actively fought against Maul's regime and his super commandos. Bo-Katan attempted to break out her sister from prison, the former Duchess, but that plan did not succeed. She would then help free Obi-Wan Kenobi when he was captured on his own rescue attempt to grab the Duchess. The reality was the Nite Owl faction lacked the manpower, weapons, and resources to really pose a significant threat against Maul's Mandalore. Years later, while on a mission on Obadiah, Bo-Katan spotted the exiled Jedi Ahsoka Tano. Desperate for any help at this point, Bo-Katan realizes that the Jedi will basically do anything to get their hands on a Sith Lord, like Maul. Well, a former Sith Lord like Maul. And so Bo-Katan meets up with Ahsoka in Coruscant and offers her an opportunity to bring in Maul once and for all. Now, Ahsoka doesn't really have much of a history of Maul. She hasn't even crossed swords with him at this point. But Ahsoka does know about Obi-Wan Kenobi's numerous runs-in with the Zabrak crime lord. Ahsoka might have been done with the Jedi Order's leadership and institutionalized structure, but she still had respect for the Jedi she served with. And like all Jedi, when they leave the Order, she had a hard time walking away from the conflict itself. She had a sense of duty to protect innocent people and also help out her friends. Whatever the reason, it's enough for Ahsoka to bring Bo-Katan in front of her former master Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. If they move quickly enough, they can capture the elusive Maul once and for all, and perhaps figure out who the Dark Lord Darth Sidious is. Little does the Republic know, not only is Maul no longer a Sith Lord, he's also fallen out of favor with Darth Sidious. Bo-Katan's plan for capturing Maul relies on the Republic launching an invasion on Sundari, the capital city of Mandalore. The Nite Owls need the Republic to provide troops and ships to help launch this invasion. But there is one huge issue with this plan, as Obi-Wan Kenobi points out. Several ancient treaties would be broken if the Republic attempted such an invasion and would cause several major political issues, including starting a brand new war. It's ironic that Obi-Wan would point this out because he technically almost started a war when he disobeyed orders and tried to rescue Satine Kryze while undercover as a Mandalorian. But there's Master Obi-Wan when he's wearing robes and he's all wise and cautious, and then there's Obi-Wan when he's full of combat stims and wearing a suit of Beskar. The clothes make the man. But seriously, what is Obi-Wan talking about? What are these ancient treaties? Well, first, the invasion of Mandalore by the Grand Army of the Republic would be an act of aggression carried out by the Republic against one of its own member states. Mandalore is still a part of the Republic. It does have a special status, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. More importantly, Maul is not actually the leader of the Mandalorian government. He technically only leads the Death Watch faction. The public persona that guides the day-to-day operations of Mandalore is Prime Minister Almec, a position that Almec held when Duchess Satine Kryze was still alive in charge. So according to a lot of people, the government of Mandalore was actually legitimate. Now, had Count Dooku arrived with one of his goons and an army of battle droids and taken over the planet by force, then the Republic had grounds to intervene. But no, Mandalore is still technically a part of the Republic, even with Maul in charge. But that in itself is still a very vague term. Being a part of the Republic doesn't mean much, especially when the federal government is so weak, which is how the Separatist crisis kicked off in the first place. And so the invasion of Mandalore could be seen as an illegal Republic invasion of its own territory. Just like how the President of the United States cannot deploy U.S. troops on American soil unless there is an insurrection or a foreign invasion. While some people in the Republic might see Maul and Almec as foreign invaders or insurrectionists, there's definitely a legal case that Maul can build that would legitimize his rule. It's really tricky interpreting constitutional law. I mean, there's always a little bit of leeway if you're smart enough. This is why most presidents have several lawyers working with them so that they can bend the Constitution to their will. The Clone Wars was also a battle for the hearts and minds of the galaxy. There were several systems that were kind of on the fence on whether they wanted to stay in the Republic or join the Separatists. And so the last thing the Republic wanted anyone seeing was them invading Republic world and then staging a coup and getting rid of the government there. Earlier on in the war, when Anakin Skywalker suggested that the Jedi aid Onderonian resistance fighters in their campaign against the Onderonian government, which had aligned itself with the Separatists, the Jedi also debated this same problem. Despite the fact that the Onderonian government was deploying battle droids in the street, the Jedi were still hesitant to even send observers to help train the local resistance. Justifying the invasion of Mandalore would be a lot more difficult because there isn't even a Separatist presence on the planet. And it's really the Jedi's job to prevent more bloodshed rather than escalate the war by starting new fronts. Now, the next thing that really makes attacking Mandalore extremely tricky is the fact that it leads what's known as the Council of Neutral Systems. Mandalorians have a pretty violent history of warfare and cataclysmic destruction. I mean, just look at their home planet. There used to be trees and lakes and stuff, and now they live in a giant artificial dome. The New Mandalorian faction was a political group that believed in pacifism. They ironically fought a bloody civil war against the Death Watch and other more traditionalist Mandalorian factions and ultimately won control of the planet. The New Mandalorians ushered in a period of peace and prosperity for Mandalore. See, the Mandalorians were actually very industrious and intelligent people. But when more than half of your society are involved in dangerous professions like being a soldier or a mercenary or a bounty hunter, it severely holds back the progression of your society. All the New Mandalorians did was create a new government and economy and greatly reduce the deaths of young men, and instead shifted their energy towards doing more productive and constructive things. Duchess Satine wasn't just a reformer, she was a true believer in the ideology of pacifism in the most annoying and extreme way. She actually started what's known as the Council of Neutral Systems. At its height during the Clone Wars, over 1,500 different systems were involved in this faction. Their main demand was to remain neutral in the coming wars and be allowed to continue to trade and have diplomatic ties with both the Separatists and the Republic. The fact that such a council actually exists shows us just how weak the central government was at this time. Imagine if the United States invaded Canada, for instance, and Alaska decides to remain neutral in the war. This would mean that the US military would not be allowed to draw soldiers from the Alaskan civilian population. They also wouldn't be allowed to launch any invasions across the Alaskan-Canadian border. As you can expect, this would never happen in a million years, so it's very strange that there is a Council of Neutral Systems within the Republic. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, this wasn't just an ideological movement, though. Most of the worlds in the Council of Neutral Systems depended on both Separatist and Republic systems to support its economy. This was as much of a political decision as it was an economic one. Worlds like Ryloth, Mandalore, and Rhodia had very complicated supply chains and export and import infrastructure. So getting rid of entire planets because they've joined the Separatist Alliance would be very detrimental to their economic outlook. Mandalore actually had to rely on black market shipments just so that the people could have access to basic supplies and goods. The Council of Neutral Systems actually held no real official power. I mean, there wasn't any military force backing this organization, and they basically used collective bargaining to get things done. It was their numbers that was their power. But as the war and federal government grew larger and more complex, the neutral systems also began seeing encroachments on their neutrality from both sides. Humans are extremely volatile. We're always constantly changing. Our personality is not static, neither are our tastes or our perceptions of the world. This is why old friends drift apart, and it's also why you might not be able to recognize yourself from 10 years ago in an old photo. Someone like Obi-Wan Kenobi would have never agreed to sending an invasion force to a neutral planet like Mandalore in the beginning of the war. He was a man that was dedicated to following the rules and the Jedi Code, and he still was, but he experienced a lot of messed up things throughout the Clone Wars, and he lost a lot of loved ones. So clearly in this situation, he was weighing the two options. We already had seen cracks in Obi-Wan Kenobi when he decided to abandon his post and go on that crazy unsanctioned rescue mission for Satine Kryze on Mandalore. And bo-katan does remind Obi-Wan Kenobi how much Satine Kryze would have hated knowing that Maul was still in charge of her people and her planet. Obi-Wan ultimately decides to consult the Jedi Council before agreeing or disagreeing with the invasion. But before that could happen, the Separatists attack Coruscant, starting the Battle of Coruscant we see in Episode 3. Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi split their forces and send a portion of the 501st, led by Captain Rex, to Mandalore, along with Ahsoka, starting a new war for the Republic against the Mandalore. The Senate didn't have to approve this decision. The Supreme Chancellor was too busy getting kidnapped, so he also was not in the decision-making process. So ultimately, it was up to Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker and perhaps the Jedi Council to decide to start the Republic's last war. It just goes to show you how crazy powerful the Jedi Order had become in these last moments of the Republic. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.